Hello and welcome back to the second set of slides on researching and paraphrasing and summarizing and all those things that are important in working towards completing a case study or a research project. Now, in this set of slides, I want you to consider paraphrasing and summarizing because it is a useful tool. It is, just in case you're not sure, it involves putting an original passage into your own words, especially the last four words, into your own words. That is really crucial. And it's really a lot easier than you think because one of the best ways, one of the best strategies in doing that is reading something and then closing the book or at least looking away and just asking yourself, okay, what is the gist of this statement, of this paragraph, this sentence? What's the main idea? And if you can write that out without going back and looking at your source, you're more likely to be able to paraphrase and summarize really effectively. So you're looking at something and you're putting the original passage into your own words, or you're using your own thoughts, your own style to restate something that was said elsewhere. Now you still have to cite it, but what you're doing now is you're eliminating the amount of citation that is direct. So let's take sort of a brief moment here and see if we can do it. So here's a passage from an article called Measuring the New Prosperity. It says, the way economists look at it, the 1998 ice storm, Nova Scotia's encounter with Hurricane Juan, and British Columbia's fires and floods of 2003 were all good for the economy. How's that? Because they all cost hundreds of millions of dollars of damage that needed to be repaired. They forced both governments and the private sector to spend money creating direct jobs. Those events resulted in a building boom, stimulus, spending. That has to be good. So there it is. It's basically looking at, obviously, it's an article about economics. It's not about hurricanes and storms and natural disasters. It's about economics. So first of all, that's the perspective. So we're looking at these events that occurred between 1998 and 2003. Somehow being good for the economy. So that's kind of the gist of the piece. But it's kind of looking at it backwards, going, okay, well, normally a natural disaster is a bad thing. It is, after all, a disaster. But economically, it's a boon. So that's kind of what you want to think about. So let's see if we can rewrite that in one or two sentences in our own words, the main thought of that previous slide. So I mentioned it's taking an economic perspective. It's looking at natural disasters in Canada over a short period of time and how this translates positively as an economic boom. So that's kind of what you want to think about. So let's try this. Quote, apparently, natural disasters are good for the economy because it stimulates both governments and the private sector to invest in direct employment. That's essentially what that paragraph is about. And that's in one sentence. Now, because you are stating a clear idea, which is that natural disasters are good for the economy, someone may say, well, where did you read that? Well, I read it in this article here. Let's go back for a moment, called Measuring the New Prosperity. And I rewrote it in one sentence. So these are my words, but the idea belongs to someone else, and I found it somewhere else. So although it's not a direct quotation, so let's say these quotations here and here, I'm only saying that because that's what I wrote, those would be gone. So the quotation would be gone, but the citation would still be there because quotations imply a direct quote. This is not a direct quote. This is a paraphrase. And a paraphrase is still really useful in the sense that it will convey information or a chunk of information in a digestible form, which is one or two sentences that will summarize a full paragraph. But even though you're doing that and writing it in your own words, you still have to cite it. You still have to tell the person, this is where I found it. Okay, so let's carry on here, Measuring the New Prosperity, and read on. Okay, it says, of course, they were horrible events for the people who had their homes destroyed, who went without power for a month or more, or were forced into shelters until their communities could pick up the pieces, to say nothing of the people who died or the grieving families they left behind. But on the economic ledger, they go down on the plus side. That's because our method of measuring the economy is nuts. Okay, so once again, taking this economic perspective or point of view towards natural disasters and pain and suffering, which is really what this next long statement is saying. From an economic point of view, economics either doesn't see it, or at the very least, doesn't even measure it. So all that pain and suffering and grieving actually comes down on the plus side because it generates jobs. So once again, let's see if we can rewrite this idea into our own words. And it would look something like this. Of course, measurements of economic prosperity do not take into account the suffering and hardships that often accompany natural disasters. So can you imagine that sentence and the previous one that we wrote in our own words? Those two sentences now summarize almost a paragraph length statement, right? A sentence. So measuring the amount of words versus the original source to the paraphrasing, clearly there will be much less. You can sometimes paraphrase in one sentence an entire paragraph's worth of ideas. And this is what we've done here. Of course, measurements of economic prosperity do not take into account the suffering and hardships that often accompany natural disasters. And that's essentially what the previous statements that we saw here were saying. So that's a fairly long sentence, but there we are, saying essentially the same idea, expressing and stating the same idea, but using our own words. And that's it. That's how you do it. It's pretty straightforward, and the more you do it, the better you get at summarizing information. And so you just kind of read, a passage out of a book or an article, a journal article, for example, and you want to try to summarize it, right? You want to condense that information into one sentence or maybe a couple of sentences if it's a complex idea. But regardless, when you summarize, you are condensing or reducing a large block of text into a shorter one. And you could take a chapter out of a book and sort of read through it and sort of jot down some of the main points. And you could take an entire chapter and summarize that into a paragraph or two, or one paragraph into one sentence. No matter what, summarizing is always much less. But summaries are also written in your own words. And they are condensing another person's ideas into your own words in a much shorter and more digestible form. But you still have to cite that passage. You have to let people know where it came from. Now, paraphrasing, similar to summarizing, that's when you rewrite another person's work into your own words. It restates the original material in just about the same number of words, so it looks about the same length, but it uses your own words. And in both cases, summarizing and paraphrasing, you're using your own words. That's the key point. In both cases, summarizing, summary is shorter. Paraphrase may be the same length. It's rarely longer, but it's usually about the same length. But again, in both cases, and especially paraphrasing, your own words. Okay, so the question becomes, when do you quote, right? Is there something about that statement that is unique or provocative that you wish to kind of capture? If that's the case, then absolutely quote from it directly, but make sure you quote from it directly. And use direct quotations for one of three reasons. The first one is to provide that objective background data and establish the severity of a problem as seen by experts. Experts may be able to phrase an issue, a statement that is pithy, succinct, right to the point. It doesn't beat around the bush. It just gets right to the point. So if someone provides a statement for you that really captures in every sense of the word what this idea is all about, then go ahead and quote it directly, because it could be something about that statement, the way it's phrased, the way it really uses strong action verbs, and you want to keep that. Go ahead and quote it. So the severity of the problem may be posed by an expert in such a way that you wish to keep that and not rewrite it. That's one reason for using quote. The second, to repeat identical phrasing because of its precision, clarity, or aptness. Now, the first two really kind of overlap or interact in a very significant way, because if the severity of the problem is stated with precision and clarity and aptness, then absolutely, that's what you want to do. Now, another reason why you want to use a direct quote is if you're going to criticize a work. So you can't sort of paraphrase or summarize a text and begin to attack it without showing and indicating to the reader exactly what it is that you are going to attack. So if you're going to do that, provide critical analysis, you need to duplicate the exact wording and the work before you start to criticize. And again, you would do it in quotations. So when you're doing this, you want to set up your statement, your transitional phrase, we'll say, in this case here as Driscoll, bracket 2001, which is APA formatting. As Driscoll 2001 either states, points out, argues, contends, observes, whatever it may be, choose the verb that's most appropriate to reflect the intention of the original author. In other words, the quotation that you are using, that you're going to be drawing from, set it up using the proper verb. So whether it's Driscoll stating, pointing, arguing, Gratzer argues, states the following, and then you put in your direct quotation, whatever it may be, you wish to use all the different verbs at your disposal, to sit down and say, well, this particular author observed the following, and then you put in quotations. Or concludes, right? This person may have done a ton of work, and their conclusions are written in a really precise and concise way, and you wish to present that intact. So you put quotation marks around it. So Driscoll 2001 concludes the following. And again, a direct quotation. Now, what is important to remember is that in both summary and paraphrasing, summary, less words, paraphrasing, roughly the same, but still your own words, the language must be different from the original. And the sentence structure must also be different. Because if you don't, right, you're plagiarizing. And especially if you simply summarize or paraphrase a passage and don't cite it correctly and provide APA citation, you will be hit with plagiarism. And that's exactly what's going on. That's what that is. Borrowing another person's ideas, stealing another person's ideas. And if you're doing that and you find, really good sources and you cut and paste and whatever else, really all you're being asked to do is take one last final step, which is to cite it. And if it is a research paper, no one is saying that that's wrong, because you're being asked to research. You're being asked to look into this issue, this problem, whatever that main thesis is, and find that information. So take that extra step, and once you summarize or paraphrase or quote directly, whatever you choose to do, at least provide a footnote, or at least if you're using APA, in brackets, you tell us the author's name, their last name, of course, the year of publication, and then the page number. That's all you have to do. That's pretty well it. It's not that hard. So here's a couple of examples here. This would be plagiarism. Okay, the automotive industry has not shown good judgment in designing automotive features that distract drivers. A classic example is the use of a touch-sensitive screen to replace all the controls from radios, tapes, or CD players, and heating, cooling. Although an interesting technology, such devices require that the driver take his eyes off the road. So that was written by Tom and Ray Magliozzi, a letter to the state senator, found on page 3. So the plagiarized version, which is one that really doesn't change a whole lot, radio show host Tom and Ray Magliozzi argue that the automotive industry has not demonstrated good judgment, just like we saw up above, in devising car features that distract drivers. Again, a direct quote. One feature is a touch-sensitive screen that replaces controls for radios, tape CD players, and heating, cooling. Again, a direct quote. Although the technology is interesting, and above it said, although an interesting technology, you just change the order of the words, such devices require that a driver look away from the road. Well, again, you're still writing very slight differences in terms of the main idea presented in the original text. That's plagiarism. Okay, you can paraphrase. Again, we'll go and read through, and then we go to the paraphrase. Radio show host Tom and Ray Magliozzi claim that motor vehicle manufacturers do not always design features with safety in mind. Okay, so there's the gist of that first statement. For example, when designers replaced radio, CD players, and temperature control knobs with touch-sensitive panels, they were forgetting one thing. To use the panel, drivers would need to take their eyes off the road. So there is the gist of this statement in the original, translated into a paraphrased version, roughly the same length, because it's not a summary. It's roughly the same length, but using their own words. And that's really all it is. Again, another paraphrase. We'll read the original is still the same. Tom and Ray Magliozzi, hosts of Car Talk radio show, criticized the motor vehicle industry for contributing to driver distraction. Again, it captures the gist of the paper, the article. They give the example of touch-sensitive technology for operating the radio, CD players, and tape decks for controlling temperature. Unlike old-fashioned knobs, this new technology requires drivers to look away from the road. Same thing. And there, it should be, you see in brackets, the number 3, which is page 3. So even though it was paraphrased, it is slightly shorter, not by much, but slightly shorter. The number 3 still indicates that it came from somewhere. Because right there, host of Car Talk radio show. Well, did they say it on air? Did they present it in the paper? Turns out they did, in a letter to a state senator. So that's essentially what you want to do. When you are looking at material, you have choices. Do I summarize these statements? Do I paraphrase them? Do I quote them directly? And if I do, why am I quoting them directly? What is unique to doing that rather than just simply providing a summary? But if you don't, you are plagiarizing. And this is the warning. This is the warning you're going to get when you submit your research report and it hits 68% on Turnitin, and your essay lights up like a Christmas tree. That's not good. Now, if every single one of those citations, 68%, is a possibility, as everything's properly cited, and there are citations either in the text paragraphs as well as the works cited, and they match up, you're good. But if I see that the sources don't match up with the works cited, that's plagiarism. So you've simply just cut and pasted. Don't do it. That's all. Just don't do it. Now, you can plagiarize unintentionally or accidentally, and you want to be careful that you don't do that. So that's why when I set up the submission boxes, you can submit your paper, but please go ahead and look at it and turn it in and check to make sure. Because you can submit this thing 3 or 4 times until you get it right, and suddenly 68% comes down to, well, 23% or 10%. Remember though, it is a research paper, so it will come up, it will light up a little bit, but you need to make sure that those passages are properly cited. Whether it's summary, paraphrase, or direct quotation, they need to be properly cited. So, when you are trying to refrain from plagiarizing, one of the best ways to do it is to simply read the passage and then close the book or look away from the article and try to write in your own words. Now, the more you do that, the easier it gets, but you want to make sure that you still don't look directly at that source, because you will end up plagiarizing in some way. So that is part 2 of summary and paraphrase, and I'll be back very shortly with the last part. See you soon.